Hello there, this is a video accompanying the Joomla tutorial series developing an MVC component, and in this video we're looking at adding associations. Now I'm going to split this step into 3 videos, and in the first video I'm going to look at the general stuff plus the hello worlds view. That's this view of all of the records. And then in the second video, I'll look at the edit stuff. And in the third video, we'll have a look at the front end changes. So this is about associations, which hopefully you will be aware are these little things here where we have got associations between different records and different languages, but we're using the associations mechanism to tie them all together. And here I've got 4 Hello World records that are all associated together. Now, associations are actually stored in the associations table, and here it is here. So there's an ID, a context, and a key. And if we look at those records that I was just showing you, those 4 there, we've got IDs of 150, 149, 148, 147. And if we go down to the bottom here, we'll actually see these here. So here they are here, those 4 records. Now, decided to call the context com helloworld.item. That's under our control. But you notice that the thing that links them all together is the fact that this key value is the same. So that enables Joomla to work out what are the associations to a particular record. So it will take the ID, for example 150 here, it will find out what the key is, and it will look for other records with the same key, and those are the ones here which are associated with this original one here. And as you can see, this is what it gives you whenever you select those records from the database. And this will actually point to the French one down here, for example. So that's the database structure. If we look a little at the overall configuration, you may remember that when we set up the site to be multilingual, we had to set a plugin. We had to set this language filter plugin to enabled. And when we're setting up to be supporting associations, we have to set a particular parameter or particular option of this language filter, and we set this one item associations, and that should be set to yes. And in terms of functionality that is in the library, we've got a library function here which is JLanguage associations, and there are 2 in this class. There's one which is enabled, and is enabled really tells us whether associations is enabled. So it will check if J multilanguage is enabled, and then it will also check that parameter item association is set to true. So that's the first thing, and it's mentioned here is enabled. And the second thing in this file is get associations. So get associations will return us the associations. So it's the one that goes through the database and finds what the associations are. It goes through that database table there, gets the associations and returns them back to us. Incidentally, if you're wondering how you compute this value here, it's actually computed in our file jmodeladmin, and it's part of the code which is associated with saving records after they've been edited. And if we go way down to line 1280, part of the functionality for saving is we've got an associations array there, which is pointing to the different records that are associated together, and it takes JSON encode of that associations to produce a string, and then it takes an MD5 hash of that string, and that's what is used to set this key, and then those associations are written to the database, and you can see there's the ID, the context, and the key, which go together to make this record here. So that's what the key is. So if we start looking through some of the code here, here is our admin hello worlds view. And if we look here, we're adding a configuration field here, and that basically means that we can do associations. We can click on this field so we can sort by it. I'm going to come back to this bit in a minute. And here we are really doing a join over the associations. Now what we're doing here is we're really just finding out, does this record have any associations? We're not actually finding what the associations are, but we're just counting up the number of records, basically the number of records which have this key here, this same key. And if there are more than one of them, it means that there are associations present, and we're going to set that to true. And when we do a count, we have to say what we're grouping over. So there's a group by clause there as well. So this will actually set true or false. So whenever we look at our associations and we order by it, by clicking on it, and we click again to get it descending, it doesn't actually give us any idea of how many associations here. It just gives the records which have associations at the front. So these are all the records which have associations, which means that this is true. So, and the other thing here is in our filter fields, which are these fields up at the top, we put this extra couple of lines here, and that means that we will see those down here, associations ascending and descending. Okay, so let me come back to this section here. Now, if you think about it, we are using this view here in 3 different contexts. One is obviously this view here, whenever you put components and then you select hello world. The second is when we developed a modal. We developed it in conjunction with setting a new menu item which had a type of hello world, and when we do a select there, we get a select greeting, and here again is our hello worlds view. And then the third place is now whenever we are editing a record and we want to add in an association, we're again displaying this view. So we've got 3 different places where this view is displayed. And the issue is that if we set some of these fields here in our filter forms, you may remember that whenever we set those fields, those are persistent. So whenever we go back into that form again, we will get the same search, or if we're using here the search tools, we'll get the same language or status that we selected before. And the problem is that we need to separate these cases, because if we select here, for example, records which have B in them, we don't want that to appear here. So we need to separate these cases. So that is what this code here is all about. What we're doing is we're setting this context variable here. And if we look at our code, our library code here, our model here is inheriting from J model list. And if we look at J model list, it's got this variable here, context. And this is the context which is used when it wants to store stuff to the session. And it's in the session that it stores, you know, whatever filter you've set here on the these fields, whatever search field, and indeed whatever page you're looking at as well in the pagination. And if we go down here to the constructor, we see that guess the context. By default, the context is set to option.model name. So in our case, our option is com hello world. Our model name is hello worlds. So by default, the context will be set to com hello world dot hello worlds. So that is what we want to change in certain cases, because if we are using a modal layout, what we want to set is context, whatever the context is be set to, which is com hello world dot hello worlds, and we'll add the modal to it here. And if we are using one of these for selecting an association, we're looking for a particular language, and in that particular case we get this extra parameter forced language set, and we add that as well into the context. So really in these three cases we're going to get three different contexts, and we can see those if we look at our Joomla debug console and session. Scroll down. Here we have com hello world, which is the first bit, then hello worlds, which is the second bit, and you can see a number of things that are stored against that com hello world, hello worlds, which is really this one here. But as well as that, we have got modal, and then we've got the French one, which is, well, this is the Spanish one here, but if I selected the French one, that's basically this one here. So whatever is set in these forms or in these fields here for the French one. Similarly for the English one and the Spanish one and the English, New Zealand English one here. And then interspersed is the ones without any language field here, which are these ones here and these ones here. And those are related to the one here, which is used for selecting the greeting for the menu, which doesn't have any specific language. It's showing all of the languages. So that's what that code is all about. It's separating those cases so that whenever we put things into these fields, like this B here is for the case where we've got a filter here. And you can see that B there in the search field for this case here for the menu. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. Now we'll come on down to the view. And here's a little view, a change to our view. You may remember that when we set up the modal, we put this change in so that whenever it was it was only when it wasn't a modal that we added the sub menus. these things up here. So when it's a modal, you don't get those options there. Well, similarly, we have to make changes to separate the two modals now. So we have to separate this one here, which is for the menu, and this one here, which is for selecting the association. And the difference is that for the one for the association, we've got an extra parameter set in the URL. So if we go skip down here to where we create the this is the definition of our modal field, modal helloworld.php. And if we look down here, if there's a language thing there, we're going to add in to the URL this bit here, which is forced language equals that language. So we're going to add in an additional parameter into the URL, and it's going to be here. So what are we doing here? Well, if there's that additional parameter, then we're going to set up this little bit of XML. So we're going to define an XML element, which is like this. And here is where we start looking at our JForm API, because this filter form is what gets returned from here. And filter form refers to that little form up the top here. So this filter form is actually a JForm structure. And here's your JForm. Now, as we go from 3.7 to 3.8, things change because they are moving. Joomla is basically moving from these old things like JForm to form. So they're changing a number of the classes, and so you may notice that as we go through. In fact, if we look back to our associations in 3.7, this is class JLanguage associations and get associations, and in 3.8 it's classes associations in this namespace, and it's the same thing. So you may find that some of the classes change between 3.7 and 3.8, but they still got the same sort of structure and still the same APIs. So here we're calling the API set field, and if we go down to set field, what it does, it takes the element that we have defined and it puts it into that form, and the form really in its internal structure holds the form definition, as it were, as an XML structure, XML element. So what we're saying, we're taking a part of that XML element, we're defining another little element here, and what we want to do is inject it into the form's kind of internal structure, and we're replacing what is there already. So if we look at these parameters, we're passing in our little XML structure that we've defined here, and the second parameter is filter, and that is specifying where we're putting it. So we're putting it into this group. This is where we're going to set that field. And the third parameter is replace, and we are asking it to replace it. So this structure here is going into the filter group, and it's going to replace whatever is there. So if we look back to our form definition for our filter fields, here's our group here called filter, and it's saying replace within that group this one here, field name equals language. So it's going to replace this one here, field name equals language, with the one that we've defined here. And if you go into your, I'm just going to switch on tools. So this is our modal where we're using it for a menu item. So if it's for a menu item, it doesn't go through this code. So it keeps the original one from our form up here. And if we look at inspector here, we can actually see this form here. There's our select for our language. I'll just zoom in on that so you can see that. However, if we go to our equivalent one for the association, and we'll switch on code, you'll see there's no language one there. And if we use inspector, there's our select for the status. And if we look at immediately below, there's what we've replaced it with. Type equals hidden, value equals FR. And that really comes from our little bit of code down here, where we've replaced that field in the XML structure, which is in the XML structure up here. We've replaced it with this little bit here. So hopefully that's clear. Also, what we're doing here is changing this active filter here and unsetting this one. And it's probably not necessary now, but I did see a little problem report where there was an issue if you didn't do that. So it may not be necessary now because I think they've fixed that problem. Okay, so that's that. This is our modal output then. So this is the modal layout, which defines these two things here. And you'll notice here, this is where we get the forced language. This is really saying get that parameter that's set in the URL. And depending on what it is, set that up again. Name equals forced language, value equals that. So whenever this form is resubmitted, it's going to send back to the server and it's going to get that forced language parameter set. Now you may ask, well, why did we not do it up here like we did the and TMPL equals component? When we set up the modal, we used that so that whenever we displayed this, we didn't get these Joomla menu items here. Well, in point of fact, it doesn't really matter, because if you remember, these are post parameters that go up with the form. These are kind of like query parameters. But at the end of the day, Joomla sets them all to be the same thing, so that whenever we call something like get command, it'll get the value of that parameter, regardless of whether it's been sent up as a post parameter like this, or whether it's been sent up as a query parameter like this. So the answer is it doesn't really matter. So that's filter. Then this is our display of the main table here. And you'll notice that we're checking that JLanguage Associations is enabled, because if it isn't, we really shouldn't be outputting the associations at all. Squeezing it in using the header. And then to output the associations, we're just using this little bit of code here in a helper file. So we got to tell Joomla where that helper file is. So that's what this is all about here. And here's our little helper file where we're getting the associations. We're adding a little bit of stuff around categories and languages, really so that we can set the tooltip up so that when we hover over it, we see that this is the French one, and in between, if we go down here, there's our URL that we get to actually edit that. So that's what all this is about. So finally, I actually developed this code under 3.7, and then someone else tested it under 3.8. And lo and behold, they came up with a problem, because the problem that they found was that these associations were pointing back to themselves. So if we go back to ID descending is the one I want. So what they were finding under 3.8 was that, as well as these associations here, we also had another association which was pointing back to this record. So there was an EN-NZ association which was pointing back to the same record again, which was obviously a problem. And when I looked at it in a bit more detail, I found that there had been a change between 3.7 and 3.8. So if we look at our code here in 3.7, it has a little section at the end which says do not return itself as an association, and it was doing this check. So if the only if the ID of the associated record is different from the ID we're passing in, does it include that in the result that it's going to send back? Here it's got return of this, and it only includes the association in it if it's different from the ID that you've passed in up here, which is the record of the IDs you're supposed to find, of the associations you're supposed to find. However, if you look at the 3.8 code, you find that there's a difference. Lo and behold, there's an extra equal sign there. So when I went looking as to why that was the case, you can see this is the file here in 3.8. If we go down, this is our line here. And if we do a view git blame, we see, well, where is that change been implemented? And it's been implemented in this change here, which is a number of changes associated with changing not equals to not equals equals in a few places, and in particular in our place here, where this is the change that has been made. So this has been replaced by this, and you'll actually see a comment here, are we sure ID is an int? Which is a good question, and at the end of the day they decide to leave it as is, and the reasoning is the variable is defined as a parameter to the function with type integer. And if you go up, well, it's not actually in the signature that it's integer, but in the comment here. So based on that comment, decided to keep that. But the trouble is that this ID has come from a SQL query. It's come from querying and the list of hello world records, and it isn't actually stored as an int, it's stored as a string. So in the old code, because it was stored as a string, whenever it came down to here, it was comparing it with an int. So PHP changed what it was stored as an int, stored as a string, to the equivalent int and did the comparison. But when we got to 3.8 with the two equal signs, it's actually checking the type as well. So that was why it was failing on my code. So really what I needed to do was pass it in as an int, and that's what this little line here is for. So making sure that whenever it's passed to the function, that it is actually passed as an int. So I relate this story really just to give you an idea of what can happen between Joomla versions, and just as a salutary warning that, well, we always have to test our code to handle upgrades. Okay, that's it for this video. In the next, we're going to look at the edit stuff. Thanks for listening.